The air inside the containment sphere carried a metallic tang that settled on the back of her throat with every breath. Vaishya stood beyond the transparent barrier, watching the human through reinforced glass that hummed with a frequency meant to suppress aggression. He sat on the edge of the narrow platform that served as both bed and bench, shoulders rounded forward, hands clasped loosely between his knees. The directive had arrived 3 cycles prior, embedded in her neural interface with the weight of command authority. Eliminate the human specimen before cultural contamination spreads beyond containable parameters. No tribunal, no appeal. The human's presence aboard the vessel had already triggered 7 protocol violations among crew members assigned to study him. The collective did not tolerate deviation. Vaishya had executed similar orders before, twice against her own kind when they exhibited signs of individual preference. This should have been simpler, yet she returned to the observation deck each rest period, drawn by something she could not categorize within approved emotional frameworks. The human looked up as she entered the anteroom. Through the translation device embedded in the cell's audio system, his voice emerged flat. "You're the one they sent." Not a question. His gaze tracked her movement as she approached the control panel that regulated the chamber's atmospheric composition. A single sequence would introduce a neural suppressant, then gradually reduce oxygen levels. Painless by design. Efficient. Her hand hovered over the interface. The human stood, closing the distance until only the humming glass separated them. He was taller than her by half a body length. Heat radiated from him in waves she could almost feel, a biological wastefulness that her people had evolved beyond generations ago. "They showed me files about your people," he said, "the way you've structured everything. No families, no attachments. Everyone serves the function they're designed for." He pressed one hand against the glass, fingers spread. "Does it work? Are you happy?" The question violated 17 conversational protocols, but the human's palm against the barrier seemed to pull heat through the supposedly impermeable surface, and she found her own hand rising, mirroring his position on the opposite side. "Happiness is not a relevant operational parameter," she said quietly. "We function. We serve the collective. Individual desire creates chaos." The human's mouth curved in an expression the database labeled as sadness. "Then why do you keep coming back here?" His eyes held hers with intensity that made her respiratory rate increase. "Every rest cycle, you stand there and watch me. That's not efficient." The observation deck logs would confirm his statement. She had accessed them obsessively, cataloging her own deviation with the same precision she had once used to identify corrupted individuals. Vaishya's people did not touch casually. Physical contact occurred during mating protocols, efficient, scheduled, and during medical procedures. Yet she remembered with clarity that should have been impossible, the moment when the human had first arrived. Sedated, strapped to a medical platform, and she had been assigned to catalogue his injuries. Her hand had rested against his chest to measure cardiac function, and even unconscious, his body had radiated heat that seemed to sink through her palm, settling somewhere behind her sternum where it had remained, burning quietly for 11 cycles. The science collective had documented the phenomenon they called resonance cascade, a psychological contamination that occurred when individuals from emotionally expressive species interacted with populations conditioned for collective efficiency. 7 crew members had been removed from duty. The human was classified as a vector, but Vaishya understood that what she felt was not contamination. It was recognition. "If I could leave here," the human said softly, "would you come with me?" The question was absurd. There was no mechanism for defection, no life beyond the collective structure. Leaving would mean severing every connection that defined her existence. She should have activated the termination sequence. Instead, she accessed the containment protocols and began studying the security gaps with methodical precision. The human watched her work, his hand still pressed against the glass, patient in a way her people had never needed to be. And Vaishya felt, for the first time in her carefully regulated life, the weight of a decision that belonged to no one but herself. The science collective convened at the start of each work cycle. Vaishya took her assigned position, hands folded precisely in her lap. "Behavioral analysis continues to yield inconsistent data," ORIM-2 stated. "The human subject demonstrates capacity for abstract thought that exceeds preliminary assessments." Recommendation: extend observation period by 15 cycles. Vaishya's secondary eyelids flickered. 15 cycles. 15 additional periods of fighting the urge to breach containment protocols and press her palm against the barrier just to feel that warmth again. Extension contradicts the directive, Narak 12 said. Cultural contamination has been documented in 7 crew members. Documented contamination remains within acceptable parameters, Shale 3 countered. Research value outweighs current risk assessment. The collective reached consensus. Extension approved. Pending daily risk assessment. Vaishya's interface logged the decision. Her hands remained perfectly still. After the session, she made her way to the medical wing. The display showed the human's body on the medical platform during initial examination. Thermal imaging revealed heat distribution, warmer core, cooler extremities, constant metabolic processes maintaining temperature. Wasteful, primitive, beautiful. The thought arrived unbidden. You access these files frequently. Vaishya turned to find Thek 7 standing in the entrance. I am assigned to termination duty, Vaishya said. Thorough understanding of the subject is required. You display symptoms consistent with documented contamination cases. Thek 7 moved closer. You access subject files during rest periods. You extend observation shifts beyond required duration. These behaviors indicate individual fixation. I serve my function with precision. For now. Thek 7 turned toward the exit. The collective monitors all personnel. Deviation from established behavioral patterns triggers automatic review. He left without further comment. Vaishya stood alone in the medical archive and felt the weight of observation settling over her like a second skin. The human was awake when she arrived during shift transition. He stood near the barrier, hand pressed against the glass. Waiting. Vaishya approached slowly, aware that her presence outside scheduled observation periods constituted a protocol violation. She stopped 3 meters from the barrier. You came back, the human said. I am assigned to your observation. Not right now. I've learned your schedules. Vaishya's hands remained at her sides. I am conducting additional assessment. Of what? Her neural interface pulsed with warning. She silenced the alert. Your species demonstrates anomalous characteristics. Further study is required. The human's expression shifted. You don't need to study anything. You already know everything about me. Your presence creates disruption. 7 crew members have exhibited behavioral changes. Is that what's happening to you? Vaishya's secondary eyelids flickered rapidly. I exhibit no such symptoms. Then why are your hands shaking? She looked down. Her fingers trembled slightly. She forced them still. The human moved closer until his breath created patches of condensation on the glass. When was the last time someone touched you? Not for a medical procedure, just touched you. Because they wanted to. Never. The answer was never. Vaishya's hand rose without conscious command, moving toward the barrier. The human shifted his palm, aligning it with where hers would land. As Vaishya's palm met the barrier, directly opposite his, she felt heat radiating through the material. Impossible, yet she felt it anyway. What's your name? He asked quietly. Designations serve identification function. Names are irrelevant. Your designation, then? Vaishya. Vaishya. The way he spoke, it added syllables, transforming the designation into something that sounded almost like poetry. I'm Marcus. Marcus. The database had listed his designation as human male, status, pending termination. But Marcus carried weight the database couldn't capture. Marcus, Vaishya repeated. His breath created another patch of condensation. See? Now we're not just specimen and executioner. We're Vaishya and Marcus. Her neural interface pulsed urgent warning, but Vaishya's hand remained against the barrier. They're going to eliminate you, she said. When contamination spreads beyond acceptable parameters, the directive will be executed. I know. Marcus's expression held steady. Question is, what are you going to do about it? She returned to her quarters with the heat from the barrier still burning in her palm. Hours later, lying on her sleep platform, Vaishya could still feel it. Sleep didn't come. At the 6th interval, she abandoned the attempt and accessed the collective's central database. She navigated through layers of archived data, resonance cascade, psychological contamination, cultural drift. The files contained detailed documentation of every contamination case. Subject displays fixation on specific individual. Subject exhibits elevated stress responses when separated from contamination source. Subject questions established protocols without logical foundation. Every symptom matched her current state. She should have reported herself immediately, but Vaishya found herself accessing a different section. Historical records from before the genetic optimization programs, when her species still maintained family structures, individual partnerships, emotional bonds. One image held her attention. Two individuals, hands clasped together, foreheads touching. The posture served no reproductive purpose, no medical function. They simply stood there, connected by choice, like Marcus's hand against the barrier. Vaishya closed the files and sat in darkness, feeling the weight of recognition settle over her. She wasn't contaminated. She was remembering something her people had deliberately forgotten. The science collective convened early. Vaishya received the summons with a sense of inevitability. She took her position, standing rather than sitting, the posture for subjects under review. Vaishya 6, your performance is under evaluation, Orim 2 stated. The display showed data logs, her observation reports, her file access patterns, her unauthorized presence during off-shift hours. Analysis indicates deviation from expected behavioral parameters, Orim 2 continued. You have accessed subject files 34 times outside required duty periods. Physiological monitoring indicates elevated stress responses during subject interaction. I have not failed to execute my assigned function, Vaishya said. Protocol parameters do not include emotional fixation, Shal 3 said. Your behavioral pattern suggests individual attachment. Vaishya could deny it, but standing in the chamber she found she didn't want to lie. The human poses questions that merit consideration, she said quietly. Silence. What questions? Orim 2 asked finally. He asks if our system works, if efficiency produces satisfaction. Vaishya paused. I find I cannot answer with certainty. More silence. Uncertainty is a symptom of contamination, Narrak 12 stated. Recommendation, immediate removal, neural reconditioning. But Orim 2 raised one hand. Contamination cases have been documented throughout collective history. Yet we have never conducted controlled study of the phenomenon itself. The debate continued. Final consensus, Vaishya would continue assignment under intensive monitoring. If contamination progressed beyond measurable parameters, immediate intervention would occur. She was a test subject now, just like Marcus. The observation deck felt different under constant surveillance. Vaishya could sense the monitoring systems tracking her every movement. Marcus seemed to understand. When she arrived for her scheduled shift, he looked up, and something in his expression acknowledged the change. They're watching us now, he said. They have always been watching. But now they're watching you watch me. A slight shift in his posture. How does that feel? It feels inefficient, because you can't just be yourself anymore. Vaishya approached the barrier slowly. I do not understand that concept. The self is defined by function. Marcus stood and moved toward the barrier. Except now you're performing for them. He pressed his palm against the glass. Trust me, I know what that's like. The familiar position. Vaishya's palm rose involuntarily. She stopped herself halfway, aware of the monitoring systems. You're allowed to touch the glass, Vaishya, Marcus said gently. You did it before. He was correct. Stopping now would indicate behavioral change under observation. Vaishya's hand completed its movement. Their palms met through the glass. The impossible heat flowed between them. There, Marcus said quietly. Now we're both being studied. Vaishya's secondary eyelids flickered. You seem calm, given your situation. Dying's not that scary when you've already lost everything else. Marcus's expression held steady. My crew, my ship, my entire world, all gone. Yet you demonstrate significant emotional response. Because grief is anomalous, or because you've all forgotten that caring about things is part of being alive. Through the glass, Vaishya could feel the warmth of his hand. Tell me about them. Your crew. Marcus's expression shifted. Surprise, then something softer. You want to know? Understanding your attachments may provide insight into the contamination phenomenon. A weak justification. But Marcus accepted it. There were 6 of us, he began. Captain was Sarah Chen. Best pilot I ever met. She used to say space was just music at a different frequency. Vaisha listened, her neural interface recording everything, but beneath the data collection, she found herself genuinely curious. Dr. Kwame handled biological surveys. He grew plants in the cargo bay, talked to them like they were crew members. Marcus's mouth curved slightly. And James, our engineer, brilliant and terrible at cards. We used to play every off shift. This seems inefficient. Playing games with predetermined outcomes. It wasn't about winning. It was about spending time together, about being less alone in the void. Less alone. Vaisha felt something that could only be described as the absence of connection, an awareness of separation that her conditioning should have prevented. They died when the life support failed, Marcus continued. They went into stasis pods to conserve oxygen while I tried to repair the equipment, but the damage was too extensive. By the time your ship found us... He stopped, took a breath. I was the only one left. Vaisha's hand remained against the glass. You mourn them. Of course I mourn them. They were my family. But mourning does not change the outcome. Emotional distress serves no functional purpose. Marcus's eyes met hers directly. Maybe not, but the fact that I feel it means they mattered, that their lives had value beyond function. Love. The historical database had shown the word, had documented its presence in pre-optimization records, an emotional attachment so strong it persisted beyond logic, beyond efficiency, beyond death itself. Vaisha's people had eliminated it deliberately. The collective would categorize this as evolutionary malfunction, she said quietly. Then maybe evolution isn't the whole story. Marcus leaned closer. Maybe there are some things worth keeping, even if they hurt. Because without them, you're not really living, you're just functioning. The monitoring systems recorded every word, every response. But Vaisha didn't move her hand from the glass. The collective's analysis session occurred during the rest period. Vaisha stood in the chamber while Orim 2 displayed her physiological data. Heart rate elevated by 12% during subject interaction. Respiratory patterns irregular. Neural activity showing increased prefrontal engagement. The leader's gaze remained steady. These measurements exceed previous baselines. Contamination is progressing. Subject interaction provides significant data regarding human psychological patterns, Vaisha responded. You are not assigned to understand contamination, Narak 12 stated. You are assigned to execute termination. And yet the collective authorized my continued assignment as a research subject. Shal 3 leaned forward. Can you maintain objective assessment while experiencing progressive psychological changes? Vaisha accessed her memories. Factual, detailed, emotionally charged. I maintain functional capacity, but your emotional state is deteriorating. Orim 2 pulled up additional data. Sleep quality has decreased by 43%. You display classic symptoms of individual fixation. Contamination cases that progress beyond threshold parameters do not recover, Narak 12 added. You risk permanent deviation from collective service. The warning hung heavy in the air. Permanent deviation. Removal from the only structure Vaisha had ever known. It should have terrified her. But she thought of Marcus's hand against the glass, of the way he spoke about friends who had died, as if their memory alone gave life meaning. I request continued assignment, she said. The research data requires additional observation periods. The collective members exchanged glances. This is not a request you make lightly, Orim 2 said. You understand the risk. I understand. Then we will continue as planned. But when contamination reaches critical threshold, intervention will be immediate. Vaisha inclined her head in acknowledgement. The cycles began to blend together, marked only by observation shifts that became the central axis around which Vaisha's existence revolved. She learned Marcus's patterns with obsessive precision, and Marcus, in turn, learned hers. You're not sleeping, he observed during one shift. Your eyes are different. Sleep quality is not relevant to observation protocols. It's relevant to you being okay. Marcus tilted his head. When did you last actually rest? Vaisha couldn't remember. Rest serves biological function. I will rest when function requires it. That's not how it works. You can't just push through exhaustion forever. My body is optimized for extended operational periods. Optimized. Marcus's expression shifted into frustration. You keep using that word like it means invincible, but I've watched you for 17 cycles. You're exhausted, and you're getting worse. He was correct. The monitoring data confirmed deteriorating physical parameters. Why do you care? The question emerged sharply. Your presence creates the contamination. My deterioration serves your research value. Marcus's hand pressed harder against the glass. I care because you're the only person on this entire ship who sees me as something other than a specimen. The only one who looks at me like I'm actually here. Vaishya's analytical training categorized it as attachment, concern, reciprocal contamination. But beneath the clinical assessment, she recognized something else. He cared about her, and she cared about him. The collective will not allow this to continue, Vaishya said quietly. When the measurements exceed acceptable parameters, they will intervene. Then maybe we should stop trying to stay within their parameters. That would result in immediate termination of both assignments. And keeping yourself contained is working so well for you. Marcus moved closer. You're falling apart trying to maintain function while denying what you actually feel. Vaishya's hand rose to mirror his position before conscious thought could intervene. What I feel is irrelevant. Then why are you here? Why do you keep coming back? Because you're warm, Vaishya thought but couldn't say. Because when I'm here, something that should be empty feels full. But saying any of that would confirm the contamination beyond doubt. So instead, she said nothing, simply stood with her palm against the barrier and let the monitoring systems record every forbidden response her body couldn't hide. The contamination report arrived during cycle 24. 9 crew members now exhibiting symptoms. Contamination spread exceeding projected parameters. Immediate intervention recommended. The science collective convened in emergency session. Vaishya stood in her designated position. Analysis confirms resonance cascade has entered exponential phase, ORIM-2 stated. 3 additional crew members have developed fixation symptoms. Containment has failed. You have served as primary exposure vector, Narration said, attention fixed on Vaishya. Your interactions with the subject created observable behavioral modeling. Vaishya absorbed the information. She had contaminated her own people through the simple act of returning again and again to press her palm against the glass. Recommendation, ORIM-2 said. Execute original directive immediately. Eliminate human subject, remove contamination source, implement neural reconditioning for all affected personnel. The words landed like physical impact. Execute. Eliminate. Timeline? Vaishya asked. Immediate. You will proceed to containment and execute termination sequence within the next shift period. Vaishya's neural interface provided technical specifications. Introduce neural suppressant. Reduce oxygen levels gradually. Monitor biological cessation. Simple. Clean. Efficient. Marcus would never know the end was coming. I require clarification, Vaishya said. The research data remains incomplete. Terminating the subject now eliminates opportunity for comprehensive analysis. Comprehensive analysis is subordinate to ship safety, Narration replied, or provides unprecedented data regarding psychological resilience, HFY countered. Vaishya has demonstrated continued functional capacity despite advanced contamination. You propose we normalize deviation? Narakson's skepticism was evident. I propose we consider whether the deviation itself might serve adaptive purpose. HFY pulled up historical data. Our genetic optimization occurred during galactic isolation. Perhaps emotional capacity serves function we have not previously recognized. The chamber erupted into debate, but ORIM-2 raised a hand, silencing discussion. The directive stands. Vaishya 6, you will execute termination protocols within the next shift period. This is not subject to further discussion. Vaishya inclined her head in acknowledgement, her body responding with trained obedience even as something inside her screamed in protest. She made her way to the observation deck during the rest period. Marcus was awake when she arrived, standing near the barrier. Somehow he knew. They gave the order, he said. Yes. When? Next shift period, approximately 4 hours from now. Marcus's hand rose to press against the glass. And you're going to do it. That is my assigned function. That's not an answer. Vaishya stopped before the barrier. I don't know. I am designed to execute orders without hesitation, but when I attempt to visualize activating the termination sequence, my neural pathways produce error responses. Error responses. Marcus's voice carried gentle amusement. You mean you don't want to kill me? Want is not relevant to function. Vaishya. He leaned closer. What do you want? The question struck with devastating simplicity. What did she want? I want to understand why your presence creates this disruption, why your inefficient warmth makes me question the only framework I have ever known. The words caught in her throat. Why the thought of executing termination protocols produces physiological responses that my training cannot categorize. That's still not an answer. I know. Vaishya's secondary eyelids flickered. I am discovering that knowing the question does not guarantee capacity to formulate response. Marcus's free hand joined the first against the glass. Let me help. I'll go first. He took a breath. I want to live. Not because I have some grand purpose, just because life, even life in this cell, is better than nothing. And I want you to be the person you actually are, not the person they designed you to be. I want you to choose what matters to you rather than what matters to the collective. Each word landed with physical weight. And I want to actually touch you, not through glass, just touch, skin to skin, the way people are supposed to connect. Vaishya's hands trembled against the barrier. She was crossing the threshold, approaching the point of no return. 4 hours, she said quietly. That is the time remaining before required execution. How do you want to spend it? I am asking if you would prefer company during the remaining time. Marcus's expression shifted into something that made Vaishya's chest constrict. I would prefer company. Your company specifically. So Vaishya stayed. She bypassed the monitoring alerts, silenced her neural interface warnings, and remained in the observation deck as the hours counted down. And Marcus stayed with her, separated by glass but connected by warmth that flowed between them like proof that some things couldn't be eliminated by optimization or protocol or fear. 4 hours. Then choice. Then consequence. At the 3rd hour, Marcus sat on the platform, eyes closed, but Vaishya could see the tension in his shoulders. Tell me about your world, she said, surprising herself with the request. Marcus's eyes opened. Earth? The database contains minimal cultural information. I would like to know more. Marcus began to talk. He described oceans that covered most of the planet's surface, forests where trees grew without cultivation, seasons that forced constant adaptation. Sounds chaotic, Vaishya observed. It is. Beautifully, terribly chaotic. Marcus's voice carried warmth. But that chaos creates diversity. Thousands of different cultures, languages, belief systems. We spend a lot of time fighting about it, but the diversity itself, that's what makes us human. The collective eliminates diversity in favor of optimized function. And does it work? Are you all happier without the chaos? Vaishya's hand rose to press against the barrier. Marcus stood and moved to mirror the position. I do not know, she said quietly. I have only experienced existence within the collective structure. Except me. Marcus leaned forward. You've been studying me for 24 cycles, so based on that observation, do you think the chaos is worth it? I think that when your crew died, you experienced pain the collective has eliminated. The grief you carry serves no functional purpose. By all logical measures, it is a weakness. But it also means they mattered, that their existence created impact beyond simple biological presence. She paused. The collective has no concept of mattering beyond function. And you think that's wrong? I think that standing here with you, feeling warmth through a barrier that should be impermeable, knowing that in less than 2 hours I must end your biological function, this experience has value I cannot quantify, and I do not want to lose it. The admission hung between them. Then don't, Marcus said simply. The directive is non-negotiable. Everything is negotiable if you're willing to pay the price. Marcus's other hand joined the first. What happens if you refuse? Immediate removal from duty, neural reconditioning. If reconditioning fails, permanent exile. And if it succeeds? If reconditioning succeeds, I will return to baseline neural function. All memory of contamination will be adjusted. Adjusted. Erased, you mean? recontextualized to remove emotional attachment. I will remember our interactions as research data, nothing more. So either way, you lose yourself? The summary was accurate and devastating. No choice led to preservation of current state. Yes, she said quietly. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then, what do you want, Vaisha? Not what they designed you for, you individual. What do you actually want? And with less than 2 hours remaining, Vaisha finally allowed herself to answer with complete honesty. I want more time. Marcus's expression shifted into something that made Vaisha's chest constrict. Then let's use what we have. Tell me what you're thinking. So, Vaisha talked. She described the first moment she had seen him, the way his unconscious body had radiated heat. She explained how she had started counting his breathing patterns. She confessed that she had accessed historical archives, searching for context to understand feelings she wasn't supposed to experience. At the 1-hour mark, her neural interface delivered final warning. Proceed to control panel and initiate termination sequence. She silenced the alert. They're going to intervene soon, she said, when I do not execute the directive. How long do we have? 15 minutes maximum. Then we have 15 minutes. Marcus pressed harder against the glass. Vaisha, listen to me. Whatever happens next, I need you to know something. What? These 24 cycles have been bearable because of you, because you looked at me like a person instead of a specimen. His voice carried intensity that made every word feel weighted. You gave me back my humanity. That matters. More than survival. More than efficiency. Vaisha felt moisture forming in her optical membranes. Tears, the database called them, eliminated from her species as wasteful and inefficient. I do not know how to preserve this, she whispered. I cannot execute the directive, but I cannot prevent the intervention. Maybe there is no path forward. Marcus's hands remained steady. Maybe we just have now, this moment, this connection. Maybe that's enough. But it wasn't enough. Vaisha wanted more than now. She wanted time to understand what these feelings meant. She wanted the impossible. The chamber door opened. 3 security personnel entered. They approached with standard efficiency. Vaisha 6, the lead officer stated, you have failed to execute assigned directive. Removal procedures are now in effect. Marcus moved closer to the barrier. Don't let them take you. I have no mechanism to prevent removal. Then make one. Choose for yourself one time. The security personnel were 3 meters away, 2 meters, and Vaisha, who had spent her entire existence following protocols, made a choice. She accessed the containment control panel, but instead of initiating termination sequence, she triggered the barrier release. The glass wall slid open with a soft hiss. For the first time in 24 cycles, nothing stood between them. The security personnel froze. The barrier opening violated every contamination protocol. Marcus stood on the other side, 3 meters of empty air between them. He didn't move immediately. Then slowly, he stepped forward. Vaisha felt her analytical training cataloging every detail. Marcus's height exceeded hers by approximately 30 centimeters, his movements carrying slight hesitation. But beneath the clinical observation, every neural pathway focused on a single awareness. He was getting closer. Vaisha 6, step away from the containment unit immediately, the lead security officer commanded. But Vaisha's attention remained fixed on Marcus. 2 meters, 1 meter, close enough to feel heat radiating from him, not through barrier but direct and overwhelming. Last warning, non-compliance will result in forced removal. Marcus stopped half a meter away. This close, Vaisha could see his eyes contained multiple shades of brown, could hear his breathing, could smell something distinctly him. May I touch you? Marcus raised his hand slowly, palm up. For real this time? Vaisha's response bypassed conscious thought. Her hand rose to meet his, and for the first time in her existence, she felt skin against skin with no barrier between. The sensation crashed through her with overwhelming intensity. Marcus's palm radiated warmth her internal readings couldn't quantify. His fingers curled gently around her hand, creating pressure that spoke of intention and choice. Connection. Direct. Unfiltered. Real. Oh, she breathed. Marcus's expression shifted into something soft and devastating. Yeah. Oh. The security personnel moved forward, but Marcus's free hand rose in a stopping gesture. Wait. Please, just give us a minute. Marcus's thumb moved across Vaish's palm in small strokes. Such a simple gesture. Yet every nerve in her hand seemed to activate. She had touched before. Clinical examinations, mating protocols. But none of it had felt like this. Your hands are different than I imagined, Marcus said. Cooler, smoother, but still real. You're real. As opposed to theoretical. As opposed to something I'd convinced myself I'd never actually get to feel. Marcus's other hand rose slowly, hovering near Vaish's face. Can I? She nodded, beyond words. His fingertips brushed her cheek with gentleness that made her secondary eyelids flutter. The touch sent awareness cascading through neural pathways her conditioning should have kept dormant. She could feel the slight calluses on his fingers, the warmth of his palm as it curved to fit the line of her jaw. You're shaking, Marcus observed softly. Physiological response to novel stimulus. But the explanation was insufficient. This was her body responding to wanted touch. Is this okay? Marcus asked. I can stop if... Don't. The word emerged with force. Please don't stop. So Marcus's hand remained against her cheek while his other hand held hers. This was what the barrier had prevented. This was why contamination spread with such devastating efficiency. The security personnel had stopped advancing, forming a loose semicircle 3 meters away. Vaisha 6, the lead officer said finally, his voice carrying something almost like regret. This contact cannot continue. Immediate separation is required. Marcus's hand tightened slightly on hers. What happens now? They will remove me. Initiate neural reconditioning. You will be terminated by alternative personnel. Each word felt like physical pain. This is the consequence of my choice. Do you regret it? She looked at their joined hands, felt the warmth of his palm against her cheek. Her entire existence had been oriented toward efficiency, toward collective function. But standing here, touching Marcus, Vaisha understood that some experiences justified any consequence. No, she said quietly. I do not regret it. Marcus smiled. Good. Because neither do I. The security personnel moved forward, but before they could pull her away, Marcus leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. The gesture carried no reproductive purpose, served no biological function, just skin against skin, his breath mixing with hers. Thank you, he whispered, for choosing, for being brave enough to want something. Then the security personnel pulled her back, and Marcus's hands slipped from hers, and the distance between them reopened like a physical wound. The reconditioning chamber was smaller than Vaisha had imagined. She lay on the platform while technicians attached interface connections to her neural ports. Procedure will commence in 60 seconds, the lead technician stated. Neural pathways associated with emotional deviation will be identified and neutralized. Memory structures will be adjusted to remove attachment significance. Eliminated, as if the warmth of Marcus's hand could be excised like a tumor. I do not consent to this procedure, Vaisha said. The technician paused. Consent is not required for mandatory reconditioning. Then the collective operates without consent of those it claims to serve. You question collective authority. I question a system that eliminates capacity for individual choice while claiming to optimize for well-being. The technician was silent for a long moment. I underwent this procedure 7 cycles ago, before my assignment to reconditioning duty. Vaisha's secondary eyelids flickered. You were contaminated, exposed to an Epsilon-class trader who demonstrated excessive emotional expression. I began questioning protocols. He attached the final neural connection. The reconditioning was successful. I no longer experienced the deviation. Do you remember what you felt? I remember facts, the trader's species, the duration of exposure, the protocols I violated. The technician's hand hovered over the activation sequence. But the significance is gone. When I recall those events, I feel nothing, and you consider this successful outcome. I consider it functional. Whether function and success are equivalent, he paused. That is not a question my current neural state allows me to answer. This technician had stood where Vaisha now lay, had felt something significant enough to trigger intervention, had emerged functional, but hollowed. If you could choose, Vaisha asked quietly, would you undergo the procedure again? Choice is not relevant to mandatory protocols. But if it were, the technician's hand remained suspended. I cannot answer that. The person who could answer no longer exists. This was the true cost, not elimination of contamination symptoms, but complete erasure of the self that had emerged through connection. The technician activated the sequence. Neural connections flared to life. Vaishya felt the system accessing her cognitive structures, mapping pathways associated with Marcus's presence, identifying the neural signatures of warmth and connection, and choosing. The procedure was designed to be painless, but knowing that every memory of Marcus's hand would be stripped of significance created sensation that exceeded any physical pain. Loss, grief, desperate awareness that something vital was being taken. Then the interface connections pulsed with sudden intensity, and her consciousness fractured into cascading awareness. The first time she had seen his thermal signature, the way his voice had asked if happiness was relevant, the warmth of his palm against hers, all of it flooding through her neural pathways at once. The technician's voice filtered through chaos. Neural resistance detected. Subject is fighting the conditioning. Vaishya fought, holding on to each memory with desperate intensity. She couldn't prevent the procedure, but she could make her neural pathways light up with such intensity that maybe a ghost of what she felt might survive. The procedure continued with merciless efficiency, and Vaishya held on to warmth with everything she had, knowing it was already slipping away. Vaishya woke on the recovery platform with complete clarity and hollow precision. She knew who she was. She knew what had occurred. Exposure to human subject designated Marcus, progressive contamination symptoms, mandatory neural reconditioning. She remembered everything, but the memories carried no emotional weight. The lead technician stood nearby. Reconditioning successful. Subject shows normal cognitive function, restored emotional regulation. I understand, Vaishya said. When do I return to duty? Immediate return is not recommended. Standard protocol requires 48-hour observation. I am stable. Continued observation serves no functional purpose. The technician's expression held something that might have been concern. You display unusually rapid integration. My neural regulation scores have always been high. She was cleared for return after 36 hours. Perfect efficiency restored. The Science Collective convened to evaluate the contamination crisis. Vaishya attended in her standard role. Neural reconditioning of affected personnel is proceeding according to schedule, ORIM-2 stated. 8 of 9 contaminated crew members show successful symptom elimination. One case remains pending. That case was HFY, who had questioned whether deviation should be normalized, who had refused reconditioning consent. Refusal creates unprecedented situation, Narration 12 observed. Perhaps that paradox indicates flaw in the system itself, HFY said. Silence. You propose we allow contamination to persist? ORIM-2's tone held careful neutrality. I propose we reconsider whether what we categorize as contamination might be evolution. HFY leaned forward. 9 crew members developed attachment responses. The progression was rapid, consistent. This suggests not random malfunction but systematic capacity we have suppressed. For what? Narration 12's skepticism was evident. For connection. For recognition of individual significance beyond functional role. HFY's gaze moved across the assembled collective. The human posed a question. Does our system work? We dismissed the inquiry, but perhaps we should have considered the answer. Vaishya felt something shift in her chest. Not emotion, her conditioning prevented that, but awareness that this conversation carried weight her current neural state couldn't fully process. You speak from compromised perspective, Narration 12 stated. Your contamination has not been addressed. Then let me pose the question to someone whose judgment you do trust. HFY's attention fixed on Vaishya. You underwent successful reconditioning. You experienced contamination and recovery. From that perspective, was what you felt for the human genuine connection, or malfunction that required elimination? Every gaze turned toward Vaishya. She had the data. She had the memories, contextually adjusted but factually accurate. The experience I categorized as connection was accompanied by neural deviation from baseline parameters, she said slowly. Sleep disruption, obsessive behavioral patterns, questioning of established protocols. By all objective measures, these symptoms required intervention. That is not the question I asked, HFY pressed. I asked if what you felt was genuine or malfunction. Genuine versus malfunction implied qualitative difference beyond simple efficiency metrics. I do not know, Vaishya admitted. My current neural state does not allow me to access the emotional context required to make that determination. The answer hung in the chamber, like an indictment. Vaishya had been restored to function, but she had been rendered incapable of evaluating what had been lost. Then perhaps that incapacity represents greater loss than the contamination itself, HFY said quietly. The decision regarding Marcus's termination was postponed, pending consensus on contamination management protocols. He remained in containment, alone, waiting. Vaishya received reassignment to standard observation duties. When her shift rotation brought her to Marcus's containment unit, something in her neural pathways activated with unexpected intensity. She stood at the control panel. Below, Marcus sat on his platform, posture reflecting defeat. He looked up as she entered, and his eyes met hers, searching for something. Recognition, perhaps. He would find neither. Yet Vaishya found herself accessing the audio system. Marcus. His designation emerged with standard efficiency. His posture shifted immediately. Vaishya. Observation protocols require verification of subject status. Please confirm cognitive function and physical well-being. Not the words she had intended, or perhaps precisely the words her conditioning allowed. Marcus stood and moved toward the barrier. His hand rose automatically to press against the glass, then stopped halfway. You don't remember, he said. Not a question. I remember all relevant data. Initial contact, progressive contamination symptoms, unauthorized barrier breach, mandatory reconditioning. The records are comprehensive, but you don't feel it anymore. Emotional responses have been adjusted to baseline parameters. This is expected outcome. Marcus's expression did something complicated. So that's it. You're back to being what they designed you to be. Efficient, functional, empty. I am restored to optimal operation. And that's supposed to be better. Knowing you once felt something real and now you can't access it anymore. The question struck with unexpected precision. Vaishya's hand moved toward the control panel without activating anything. I cannot evaluate what I no longer experience, she said finally. Are they? Marcus moved closer to the barrier. Because standing on this side, it looks like they took something from you. Something that made you actually alive. Vaishya's neural pathways processed the statement. Her training provided multiple options. Dismiss the observation, remind Marcus that individual desire serves no collective purpose, redirect conversation to standard protocols. But she found herself asking instead, do you remember what I said to you during our final interaction? You said you didn't regret the choice, even knowing the consequence. That was accurate assessment given my contaminated state. However, post-reconditioning analysis suggests the evaluation was compromised. Or it was the most honest thing you'd ever said. The observation hung between them. Vaishya's restored neural conditioning should have dismissed it immediately. But something in her cognitive structures held on to the statement. She had said she didn't regret it, had meant it with certainty that exceeded any protocol. And now that certainty was gone. I should complete the observation rounds, Vaishya said. Vaishya. Marcus's hand finally completed its movement to press against the glass. If there's anything left in there, any part of you that remembers what it felt like to choose, please don't let them take that completely, even if you can't feel it anymore, even if it's just data. Don't let them erase that you were brave enough to want something. His palm against the barrier. The gesture they had shared countless times. Now she stood 3 meters away, watching, feeling nothing, but remembering everything. And somewhere in the gap between memory and emotion, Vaishya felt the first hairline fracture in her restored conditioning. The fracture widened over the following cycles. Not emotion, precisely. Her reconditioning prevented that. But awareness, growing recognition that something important had been systematically removed. Vaishya found herself accessing the contamination records with increasing frequency. Not for research. Simply to read through the documented progression of her own deviation. Subject displays elevated stress responses during separation. Subject questions established protocols. Subject demonstrates fixation patterns consistent with individual attachment. Every symptom documented. Every moment of her transformation recorded, and none of it triggered appropriate emotional response anymore. During her next observation shift, Vaishya activated the audio system before conscious decision to do so. Marcus was sitting with his back against the wall, eyes closed. "You keep coming back," he observed without opening his eyes. "Even though you don't have to. I am assigned to observation rotation." "Right. Function." Marcus's eyes opened. "Do you dream, Vaishya?" The question seemed tangential, but Vaishya found herself answering. "Sleep cycles include standard neural consolidation processes." "That's not what I asked. Do you dream? Feel things you didn't actually experience?" Vaishya's secondary eyelids flickered. Experiential sequences during recent rest periods have included irregular patterns. What kind of patterns? She shouldn't answer. But standing in the empty deck, Vaishya found clinical detachment insufficient. Tactile sensations without corresponding physical contact, thermal awareness beyond current environmental parameters, memory fragments that include emotional context, not present in post-reconditioning recall. Marcus sat forward. "You're dreaming about the contamination period, about what you felt before they adjusted your neural pathways. Dreams are not reliable data. They represent neural processing errors. Or they represent parts of you the reconditioning couldn't completely eliminate." Marcus stood and moved toward the barrier. "What do you feel in the dreams, Vaishya?" "I do not feel. I am observing experiential sequences from detached perspective." "Then what does the you in the dreams feel?" The distinction struck with unexpected precision. The Vaishya in dreams, contaminated, deviating, choosing, felt sensations current conditioning prevented. The dream state version experiences responses categorized as attachment, longing, grief over anticipated loss. The admission emerged quietly. These responses do not align with current neural parameters, because the current parameters are wrong. Marcus's hand pressed harder against the glass. "They took something from you, Vaishya, and your subconscious is trying to tell you that. Subconscious processing is not a reliable basis for questioning collective decisions, but it's your processing, individual, unique to you. Doesn't that count for something?" Vaishya's restored conditioning provided immediate answer. Individual processing serves collective function, no inherent value beyond utility. But the dream state Vaishya would have answered differently. Would have said, "Yes, it counts. My experience has value. I matter beyond my function." "I do not know," Vaishya said finally. "My current state does not allow definitive evaluation." Marcus's expression shifted into something soft. "Then maybe that's the answer itself. If you can't know whether what you lost had value, maybe the loss itself is the problem." Vaishya requested meeting with HFY, the science collective member who had refused reconditioning. They met in a neutral chamber. "You asked to speak with me," HFY said. "Regarding? You refused reconditioning. This contradicts standard protocol." "It does. Though I prefer to call it choosing alternative response to what the collective categorizes as contamination. Alternative response, as if deviation was option rather than malfunction." "Why?" Vaishya asked directly. "Neural adjustment would restore you to optimal function." "Because optimal function and optimal existence are not equivalent." HFY leaned forward. "I studied Marcus, analyzed his emotional responses, his irrational attachments. And I realized our people eliminated those capacities not because they were truly maladaptive, but because they complicated our pursuit of absolute efficiency. Efficiency serves survival. Does it? Or does the elimination of complexity create different vulnerabilities?" HFY's gaze held steady. "You experienced contamination. You felt attachment, connection. Was that experience entirely negative?" Vaishya accessed her memories, factual, emotionally hollow. It created stress responses, sleep disruption, obsessive behavioral patterns. But did it create meaning? The question cut through Vaishya's careful reasoning. Meaning, not function, not efficiency. Personal significance that existed independent of utility. The contaminated Vaishya would have answered, yes, absolute meaning. But current Vaishya found she couldn't access the framework required to evaluate the question. "I cannot determine that from my current neural state," she admitted. "Precisely my point." Shao 3 stood and moved to the window. The reconditioning doesn't just eliminate contamination, it eliminates your capacity to understand what was lost. You can remember facts, but you can't evaluate significance. And you believe this represents flaw in the reconditioning process? I believe it represents intentional design. They don't want you capable of evaluating whether emotional connection has value, because if you could make that assessment honestly, you might conclude that some things are worth preserving, even at cost to efficiency. Vaishya joined Shao 3 at the window. The void stretched in all directions, infinite and empty. You still experience the contamination, Vaishya observed. I feel curiosity about whether different forms of existence have merit. Whether connection serves purposes our current framework doesn't recognize. Shao 3 turned from the window. And yes, I feel something when I think about Marcus in that containment cell. I feel something like protective concern, like grief over anticipated loss, like awareness that his existence matters beyond simple biological function. These feelings serve no purpose, don't they? They make me ask better questions. Recognize that our system has eliminated something fundamental about what it means to be alive. The observation settled over Vaishya like weight she couldn't shake off. Her reconditioning worked. She functioned. She served her role with appropriate precision, but the dream state Vaishya whispered that function was not enough. If you could choose, Vaishya asked quietly, would you undergo reconditioning? Shao 3 was silent for a long moment. Then, with complete certainty, no. I would not, because even with all the complications, all the inefficiency, I would rather feel too much than feel nothing at all. The answer resonated in Vaishya's neural pathways with uncomfortable intensity. Choice. Individual evaluation. The weight of deciding what mattered based on personal assessment. She had made that choice once, had stood in the observation deck and opened the barrier, had felt Marcus's hand against hers, and then they had taken it away. But the memory remained, and memories carried their own kind of truth, even when emotional context had been systematically removed. The collective convened in emergency session at cycle 38. Vaishya entered the chamber to find not just the science collective, but representatives from every functional department. Orim too stood at the central display. We have reached decision point regarding the human subject. The collective must choose immediate termination to prevent additional contamination, or fundamental reassessment of how we categorize emotional capacity. Murmurs rippled through the assembled collective. Reassessment would require acknowledgement that our current framework contains flaws, Narration 12 stated, or confirms that optimization for one set of conditions does not guarantee adaptation to changing circumstances. Shao 3's voice carried quiet certainty. We designed ourselves for isolated efficiency, but we now operate in diverse galactic environment. Perhaps emotional capacity serves functions our framework doesn't recognize. Such as the ability to form genuine connections with other species, to understand motivations beyond pure efficiency. Shao 3's gaze moved across the collective. 14 crew members have now exhibited contamination symptoms. The pattern is consistent. At what point do we acknowledge this is not malfunction, but systematic response to something our conditioning tried to eliminate? You propose we accept contamination as normal? I propose we reconsider whether what we call contamination is actually recovery of capacity we should never have removed. Silence. Vaishya 6, Orim 2 said, attention fixing on her. You have experienced both states. Do you believe what you felt for the human represented malfunction requiring elimination? Every gaze turned toward her. The collective was genuinely asking her to evaluate, to choose, to provide assessment that would influence their decision. Her restored conditioning provided immediate framework. Contamination disrupted function, attachment compromised efficiency. The reconditioning had been necessary, but the dream state Vaishya whispered different truth. I believe, Vaishya said slowly, that the contamination period allowed me to experience reality in ways my conditioning had prevented. Whether this experience represented malfunction or capability depends on how we define optimal existence. Elaborate, Orim 2 commanded. If optimal existence is defined purely by efficiency and function, then my contamination represented deviation requiring correction. But if optimal existence includes capacity for individual significance, For connection that transcends utility, she paused. Then perhaps the contamination revealed not malfunction, but forgotten capacity. You cannot make that evaluation from your current neural state, Narration 12 observed. Exactly. The word emerged with unexpected force. My reconditioning was successful in eliminating contamination symptoms, but it also eliminated my capacity to determine whether what was removed had value. I can remember feeling Marcus's warmth, but I cannot access the significance that warmth carried. The admission hung in the chamber. Then your reconditioning represents incomplete solution, HFY said quietly. You are functional but fundamentally uncertain. Yes, Vaishya met the collective's gaze, and I believe that uncertainty itself suggests the answer. Because if we eliminate Marcus, we eliminate the source of questions we should be asking. Questions about whether our current framework is truly optimal. Silence. Long. Waited. You propose we preserve the human, Orim2 said, as catalyst for questioning our fundamental structure. I propose we acknowledge that his presence has already changed us. 14 crew members contaminated, more questioning our protocols every cycle. The infection is spreading not because Marcus is dangerous, but because we recognize that what he represents has value we lost. This is speculation, Narration 12 stated. Then let me provide evidence. Vaishya accessed her personal files, pulling up the dream state analysis. I have been experiencing irregular neural patterns during rest periods, tactile sensations, thermal awareness, emotional context that should not exist post-reconditioning. She displayed the data. The patterns were undeniable, consistent, recurring, showing progressive strengthening. Your reconditioning is degrading, the technician who had performed her procedure observed, or the neural adjustments were never meant to be permanent, because you cannot completely eliminate capacity that is fundamental to neural architecture. You can only suppress it, and suppression can be overcome. The chamber erupted into debate. Voices overlapping, protocols fracturing, consensus dissolving into genuine disagreement for the first time in Vaishya's memory. And standing in the center of it all, Vaishya felt something activate in her neural pathways. Not full emotion, not complete restoration, but the beginning of recognition that what she had lost might be worth fighting to recover. The collective debate continued for 6 cycles. Traditional consensus building had broken down, replaced by genuine disagreement. On cycle 44, Vaishya requested private meeting with Marcus. The request was approved. She entered the containment area to find Marcus standing near the barrier, waiting. Vaishya, her designation carrying that tonal variation. You look different. Different how? Like you're actually here. Vaishya approached the barrier slowly. My reconditioning is degrading. Neural patterns show progressive destabilization. But you're not requesting intervention. No. She stopped before the glass. I am not. Marcus's hand rose to press against the barrier. What happens now? The collective is deadlocked. HFY has proposed alternative, voluntary integration protocols, allowing contaminated individuals to maintain emotional capacity while serving adjusted roles. That sounds like compromise. It is unprecedented deviation from established function. Good. Marcus's other hand joined the first. Unprecedented seems appropriate. Vaishya looked at his hands, remembering with perfect clarity the moment the barrier had opened, the sensation of skin against skin. Her current neural state couldn't fully access the emotional significance, but the memory itself carried weight. Her conditioning could no longer dismiss. I need to ask you something, she said quietly. When we touched, before my reconditioning, what did you feel? Marcus's expression shifted into something soft. Everything. Connection. Recognition. The sense that we understood something fundamental about each other. The collective would categorize that as irrational attachment. Probably. But it was also the first time since my crew died that I felt like I mattered to someone. Vaishya's hands rose without conscious decision, moving toward the barrier. Her palms met the glass directly opposite Marcus's, and even through the impermeable surface, she felt something. Not full warmth, not complete sensation, but recognition. I cannot fully access what I felt, she said. The reconditioning eliminated emotional context, but the dreams persist. And in the dreams, I remember choosing you over protocol, over function, over everything I had been designed to be. "Do you regret it?" the question Marcus had asked before. Then, contaminated and certain, she had answered with absolute conviction. Now, with restored neural parameters and degrading conditioning, Vaishya found herself reaching for the same answer from different foundation. "I regret that the choice led to separation, that they removed my capacity to fully understand what I chose." She paused. "But the choice itself? The moment I opened the barrier and felt your hand against mine, that I do not regret." Marcus's breath created fog patterns on the glass. "Even though you can't remember what it felt like, I remember enough, and what I remember suggests that feeling fully, even briefly, is worth any consequence." "Then help me understand something. If the collective allows contaminated individuals to maintain emotional capacity, what happens to you?" HFY has proposed reversal protocols, attempting to restore neural pathways that were adjusted during reconditioning. Vaishya's secondary eyelids flickered. "Success rate is unknown. I might recover emotional capacity, or I might experience complete neural collapse. And you're considering it anyway." "I am." "Why?" The question hung in the air. Vaishya's analytical training provided multiple justifications, but standing before Marcus, hands aligned through glass, feeling the first fragmentary echoes of what she had lost, Vaishya recognized those justifications as insufficient. "Because the version of me that chose to open the barrier understood something my current state cannot access. She evaluated options with full emotional context and decided connection was worth any cost." Vaishya's voice emerged quieter than standard efficiency. "And I find I want to know if she was right." Marcus's expression did something complicated. "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard." "It is not bravery. It is curiosity about my own capacity." "It's both, and it matters that you're choosing it yourself." Choice, individual evaluation, the weight of deciding based on personal assessment. She had made that choice once, contaminated and certain. Now she was making it again, restored and uncertain. But this time, the uncertainty itself felt like progress. The reversal procedure was scheduled for cycle 49. Vaishya lay on the same platform where her reconditioning had occurred, neural interfaces connecting to the same ports. "Procedure carries significant risk," the lead technician stated. "We have no precedent for reversing successful reconditioning. Complete systemic failure remains possible outcome." "I understand." "You could maintain current state, functional, stable." "I could, but I would remain unable to evaluate whether what I lost had value worth recovering." The technician was silent. Then, quietly, "When I underwent reconditioning, I lost something I never fully understood. The fact that I cannot access what was removed does not mean it lacked significance. You question your own procedure? I question whether our pursuit of absolute efficiency eliminated something essential." The technician's hand hovered over the activation sequence. "Your willingness to risk neural collapse to find out suggests you recognize the difference." "I recognize uncertainty. Whether that uncertainty justifies the risk..." Vaishya paused. "I believe it does." The technician activated the reversal sequence. Neural connections flared, but instead of mapping pathways for elimination, the system began attempting reconstruction. Searching for suppressed neural architecture, trying to restore connections the reconditioning had severed. The process was not painless. Vaishya felt awareness fragmenting, consciousness splitting between current baseline state and the contaminated version that had felt too much. Memories flooded through cognitive structures. Marcus's voice asking if happiness was relevant, the warmth of his palm through barrier glass, the moment she had chosen connection over protocol, the devastating awareness of his hand against hers, all of it returning with emotional context intact. Joy, longing, fear, grief, connection, love. The technician's voice filtered through the chaos. Neural response exceeding projected parameters. Subject experiencing complete emotional restoration. But Vaishya barely heard. She was drowning in sensation her conditioning had eliminated, feeling everything at once. It was overwhelming. It was terrible. It was perfect. The procedure completed after 18 minutes. Vaishya lay on the platform, consciousness stabilizing. She opened her eyes to find HFY standing nearby. "How do you feel?" the Science Collective member asked quietly. Vaishya sat up slowly. Her chest felt full instead of empty. Her neural pathways hummed with activity beyond standard cognitive processing. And when she thought about Marcus, she felt everything. "I feel," Vaishya said, the simple statement carrying weight that exceeded its surface meaning. Completely, overwhelmingly, beautifully. Shal-3's expression shifted into something that might have been relief. The restoration was successful. More than successful. Vaishya stood. "I can access both states now. Remember what it felt like to be reconditioned, functional but hollow, and feel what it means to be whole again. The comparison is, there is no comparison. And if given choice between the two states, I would choose this," she said with absolute certainty, even knowing it includes pain, uncertainty, grief, because feeling too much is infinitely preferable to feeling nothing at all. Then perhaps we have our answer to what the collective should become. Vaishya made her way to the containment area with restored emotional capacity, creating overwhelming awareness of every sensation, anticipation building with each step. She could feel all of it, and it was glorious. She entered the observation deck to find Marcus already standing at the barrier. His eyes met hers and his expression shifted immediately. "Vaishya." Recognition. "You did it. The procedure worked." It worked. She approached, each step weighted with significance. "I remember everything now, with full emotional context, including what it felt like to lose you." Marcus moved to press his hand against the glass, and Vaishya mirrored the gesture without hesitation. The connection flowed between them, not just phantom warmth anymore, but genuine sensation. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Vaishya accessed the collective's latest consensus. The collective has reached decision. Termination order has been rescinded. Shal-3's proposal has been accepted. Voluntary integration protocols for emotionally expressive individuals. "You mean they're not going to kill me?" "They are not, and more than that, they are acknowledging that what you represent has value. That emotional capacity serves functions our optimization eliminated." Marcus's expression did something complicated. "Because of you. Because you were willing to risk everything. Because of us." Vaishya's hand pressed harder against the glass. "You showed me what connection could be. I chose to pursue it. And together we forced the collective to question assumptions they had maintained for generations. So what now? Now we finish what we started." She triggered the barrier release. The glass wall slid open for the second time, and nothing stood between them except empty air and choice. Marcus stepped forward slowly, cautiously, but Vaishya didn't move. She waited, letting him close the distance at his own pace. He stopped directly before her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, could see the exact texture of his skin, could count the subtle variations in his breathing. "May I?" he asked, hand rising slowly. "Yes, please." Marcus's hand cupped her face with gentleness that made her neural pathways light up with cascading sensation. His palm radiated warmth that sank through her skin, settling in her chest with devastating familiarity. This was what she had lost. This was what the reconditioning had tried to eliminate. This impossible, inefficient, beautiful warmth. "I thought I'd never feel this again," Vaishya whispered, her own hand rising to cover his. "But they didn't." Marcus's thumb brushed across her cheek. "You fought to get it back. You risked everything for the possibility of feeling again." "Not everything." Vaishya's other hand found his, fingers intertwining. "I risked a state of being that was safe, but empty. And I chose the terrifying possibility of being whole." Marcus's forehead lowered to rest against hers, gesture she remembered with perfect clarity, now experienced with full emotional context. His breath mixed with hers, his warmth seeping into her with patient inevitability. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for choosing, for being brave enough to want something, for teaching them that some things matter more than efficiency." Vaishya's hands moved to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palms. Inefficient rhythm, wasteful warmth, proof that he was alive and present and real. "Thank you for being worth choosing," she replied, "for asking questions I didn't know I needed to answer, for existing with such beautiful inefficiency that you made me question everything I had been designed to believe." They stood like that for long minutes, connected by touch and warmth and the simple reality of being chosen and choosing in return. Eventually, they would have to address practicalities, integration protocols, living arrangements, how human and her species would coexist. But for now, standing in the observation deck with the barrier finally open and nothing separating them except shared breath and intention, Vaishya allowed herself to simply feel everything, completely, without apology or explanation. Because she had learned through contamination and reconditioning and restoration and choice that some truths transcended protocol, that some warmth was worth any consequence. That being fully alive, with all its inefficiency and uncertainty and overwhelming sensation, was infinitely preferable to the hollow perfection of optimized function. And that love, in all its irrational, beautiful, devastating complexity, was perhaps the most essential capacity of all.